Are Bitcoin legal tender laws a bad idea? Hi, I'm Nate Martin. Welcome to the Bitcoin Effect, where we talk about politics, economics, and the effects of the hardest money ever devised by man, Bitcoin. With the decision of El Salvador's president Nayib Bukele to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender in the Central American nation, complete with the state-provided Chivo wallet, a plot of oceanfront deemed Bitcoin Beach, and plans for a pseudo-utopian Bitcoin city funded by Bitcoin bonds, the idea of legislating Bitcoin as legal tender has jumped to the forefront of political discussion. Tennessee has joined Arizona, Texas, and California, among others, as having drafted legislation to make Bitcoin legal tender. But what does that actually mean? Well, let's go to the dictionary. Legal tender is money that is legally valid for the payment of debts and that must be accepted for that purpose when offered. But legal tender doesn't have such a good reputation in American history. Just take a look at President Lincoln's error out of necessity, the Legal Tender Act of 1862, which was proposed in order to fund the Civil War effort. This article by Philip W. Newcomer, published by fee.org in 1986, elucidates the facts. The coming of the Civil War brought with it 4 years of savage fighting, resulting in an unprecedented loss of life and property. Both the Union and Confederacy, however, failed to anticipate the sustained nature of the conflict. In fact, Northern troops at first were only enlisted for 90 days. This lax attitude toward the war was shared by Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury at the time, Salmon P. Chase. And as a result, the taxes levied at the suggestion of Chase during the beginning of the conflict provided little of the revenue needed to meet federal expenditures. During the fiscal year ending June 30th of 1862, revenues were a mere 11% of the government's outlays. Now, to meet these growing expenses, President Lincoln signed the first Legal Tender Act on February 25th of 1862, which authorized the printing of $150 million in United States notes, and that amount was increased later to $450 million. These notes were declared to be lawful money and legal tender in payment of all debts, public and private. Well, because they were printed in green ink, the United States notes quickly became known as greenbacks. Now, as the bill made its way through Congress, it sparked considerable debate. Chase reluctantly submitted the currency scheme to a subcommittee chaired by Representative Elbridge G. Spalding of New York, who led the drive to pass the legislation, claiming that its acceptance was necessary for the survival of the Union. Many congressmen, however, refused to view the bill in this light. The proposal was, after all, quote, a radical departure from traditional monetary theory and practice. Now, historians have indicated that proponents of the bill didn't fully explore traditional methods of public finance. Wesley Chair Mitchell actually noted that had these 3 months been utilized energetically in passing a few simple sanctions of an Internal Revenue Tax Act and in organizing machinery for the sale of bonds, there seems to be little reason for believing that the government would have failed to obtain sufficient funds, particularly when account is taken of the improvement of credit caused by the military successes of the winter and the spring. But despite the evidence that the act wasn't needed, many political leaders viewing it, get this, as a desirable alternative to an unpopular increase in taxes, found the measure to be warranted during this state of war. Well, since the act was considered as part of Congress's war powers, few people questioned the constitutionality of legal tender. Well, that issue wasn't addressed until after the war, when controversies concerning the legal tender acts reached courts throughout the nation. The opinions resulting from decisions handed down concerning greenbacks, both in favor of and against their tender status, only go to show that the concept of legal tender is repugnant to the spirit of the Constitution of the United States. I would urge you to read this article in full, as it outlines the reasons that legal tender laws were initially ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and then the painfully weak reasoning for which the laws were later allowed to stand. But regardless of the legality of legal tender laws in the United States, one glaring obstacle stands in the way of individual states declaring Bitcoin as legal tender. And that obstacle is Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, which reads, "No state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts." So as soon as any of these bills were to become law in any of these states, they're doomed to be struck down as unconstitutional. Trying to add Bitcoin as a constitutional amendment, well, that becomes problematic in that it needs to be defined, unlike gold or silver, which are physical elements. And the rush of other crypto projects that say that they should be included in such an amendment, let alone any future forks of Bitcoin that would claim to be Bitcoin in the future, would make trying to compose a draft just as difficult as trying to get it passed in 3/4 of the state legislatures. So the pursuit itself is a waste of breath, paper, and ink. We should not seek legal tender status for Bitcoin. Instead, we should strive to make its gains tax-free. It's one thing for governments to accept Bitcoin as payment, but they still count the gains on it as taxable. The real next steps are to make capital gains untaxed altogether, eliminating the need for IRAs, deferment plans, and tax shelters of many types. It would increase liquidity for capital and incentivize active investment into new American ventures. It would free the American middle class to invest in what they choose without the encumbrances of having to take out loans against their own money or having to wait to utilize saved assets until such an age as the IRS will permit. It would lower prices of goods through vibrant competition and create more jobs for the American worker. Bitcoin doesn't need a legal status to give it value. The market's determined that already. Bitcoin doesn't need the government to determine its validity, purity, or genuineness. Nodes and miners around the world are incentivized to do that already. Bitcoin needs to be left alone to act as a true scale upon which the monetary and fiscal policies of the world's governing bodies might be weighed. Leave me your thoughts in the comments section. You can support the channel using strike.me/Nate Martin or buymeacoffee.com/Nate Martin. The first 40 contributors of $5 or more will receive a copy of Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, considered among the leading economic thinkers of the Austrian school. That's it for today's commentary. Hopefully you'll join me again for the Bitcoin Effect.